On January 10, 2000, two boys, Brian Thomas Cody Jr. and Terry Curry, were born. The Cubs had another son, and they all grew up in Grand Junction, Colorado. After attending Broadway Elementary School, Brian continued his education at Brooklyn Middle School. Additionally, he received an early diagnosis of ADHD and autistic spectrum condition, and then he started acting antisocially in middle school as well. He felt a little alien at school. Online sources said that he was bullied and frequently got into fights with other pupils he liked, acting as though he was stirring things up to obtain a response from them. And as time passed, his conduct at school merely grew worse and worse. When Brian's parents were brought into the school in the 11th grade, they were informed that some of the students didn't feel secure around him because he was constantly screwing about and acting like an extremely rude jerk. He was really taken into custody on assault charges in 2018 after using a homemade mace to strike another pupil. In 2019, he was placed on academic suspension for deliberately inciting a panic attack in a PTSD-afflicted fellow student. He was suspended once more in 2019 for making improper sexual remarks. He had a strange infatuation with all things gory, namely serial killers and Jeffrey Dahmer in particular. His peers would make fun of him for his well-known obsession. "It's you who calls him Dahmer." One of Brian's teachers in high school discovered a book that contained a comprehensive list of facts about different criminals, including their number of murders, motivation, and favorite method of murder. He took on the persona of this edgy, bear-poking guy because he truly enjoyed dark humor. He eventually had to be transferred to a different school where he could receive better attention after flying a bit too close to the sun. He was so sent to each of the 5 high schools. He was also brought to the physician for more evaluation regarding his neurodivergent condition, and his parents were informed that there were some signs suggesting he ought to be tested for possible psychosis. He had been taking medicine for anxiety and ADHD, but no formal diagnosis of psychosis was ever made for him. In spite of his harsh demeanor, he was able to establish and nurture a close-knit circle of friends during his high school years. Following his graduation, he secured employment at Safeway, a supermarket chain. It was located on Broadway, Grand Junction's equivalent of Main Street. By now, Terry and Brian Sr., his parents, had also separated. Although he spent most nights away from his mother Terry's home, he saw his father nearly every day because he lived nearby. And at this point, the co-parenting relationship was going very well. Our house served as Terry's daycare, and Brian Sr. started the Grand Junction Save a Life Jacket initiative. Brian was therefore 19 years old in 2021. Additionally, on February 28th of this year, authorities received an odd report from the Blue Heron boat launch, where Brian had really drove his vehicle into the Colorado River. Brian had previously called his parents, Terry and Brian Sr., to inform them of the issue, so he was present when police arrived. After they had arrived, they had clearly phoned the police. Brian informed the authorities that he was just there because he needed a place to sit and think when they questioned him about what happened, how he drove his car into the Colorado River, and why he was even there. And where better to do it in the middle of the night than a remote boat ramp. He was present, according to his account of the entire evening. Like the back of his automobile facing the lake, he was parked on the boat ramp, and he attempted to take off. He was simply unable to. His car kind of rolled into the lake after losing traction. Even though he was inside the automobile, he was still able to exit it and return to the boat ramp. However, he was drenched. His automobile was soaked after rolling into the river. It was also chilly because it was February in Colorado. He was quite worried that he would become hypothermic. By now, his phone had run out of power. That was a nearby road, then. He made the decision to walk to that road and wait for a car to go by in order to call for assistance, use that phone, and explain what had happened. And it took a car 5 minutes to pass at that early hour. Brian flagged down these 2 guys, a father and his son. They came to a halt. Brian was allowed to call his parents on that phone. When his parents got there, they dialed 911. However, these 2 guys allowed Brian to warm himself in their car while they waited for his parents. The cops, based on his account, simply believed that this was a humorous error. It was as if some foolish adolescent had unintentionally rolled his automobile into the river, and they were chuckling about it. Though they were perplexed by the circumstances, they kind of just assumed that it was a humorous accident. The full automobile. The Save a Life Jacket Foundation was run by Brian Sr., who conducted a lot of business out of this bar ramp, so you can imagine how humiliated his family was. Everyone is gathered here at the boat ramp, sort of. They're attempting to determine how to handle this circumstance. Terry, Brian's mother, called her pharmaceutical firm, although it's still early in the morning. Thus, no tow truck firms expressed interest in participating. However, in order to handle the situation, the police were able to contact a tow truck business that was scheduled to arrive and remove the car. And the Cohee family was permitted to go, taking Brian home to get him warmed up and dressed in dry clothes before the tow truck business had received that information. Nobody was harmed, and it was simply written off as this awkwardly humorous error. In order for Brian to get some rest and take care of himself, Terry and Brian Sr. pick him up and leave him off at home. After that, they return to the boat ramp to take care of the automobile, handle the towing circumstance, pay the tow truck driver, and other related matters. And the police saw something like a crimson material dripping off the back of the car as the tow truck was like dragging the car out of the water. It appears to be blood. They were kind of like, "Hey Harry, was Brian hurt at all?" Like, is this blood really? Does he own it? They don't have a close-up view, so they can't really tell. Terry asks Brian whether he's okay and calls him right away. They're speculating that he may not have felt the pain in himself because there were a lot of reasons why he was so chilly, or it might have been the adrenaline from everything that had transpired. It's possible that he was harmed but was unaware of it. Thus, their level of concern was minimal, and Brian was completely perplexed. "You think there's blood on the back of the car?" he asked. "I mean, I have no notion about that. I'm all right." And the police, didn't really investigate to see if it was blood or not. There were no samples taken by them. They just returned the car's ownership to him, allowing them to take it home and take care of it. It had obviously been immersed in water, which is why it was not in good condition. Naturally, though, the whole thing seemed so harmless that they didn't even bother to check on Brian's well-being. If he was unharmed, then everything was okay. Do you understand what I mean? Police were really summoned back to the Blue Heron boat ramp the following day, March 1st, after a lady named Monique reported a guy named Warren Bonds missing. Warren was homeless at the time, but Monique, who owned a bridal boutique in town, would frequently visit and talk to him. She would extend a chair to him so he could have a seat and read the books he enjoyed. It was one of his favorite activities, and they became friends throughout the years. She would give him money for things like water and food. He was also highly well known in the community. Locals and business owners would frequently lend him a hand. According to one article, he was well known as the reading man. In Grand Junction, where people would frequently stop and strike up a conversation about what he was reading. He was friendly to everyone he encountered and had a great passion for the great outdoors and the natural world. Warren, according to one woman, visited her place of business every day. Without fail, he would always be there by 6 in the morning, prior to their opening. She would offer him a complimentary coffee and invite him in before she opened her doors, before she had any clients. That being said, Monique informed the authorities that she had last seen Warren around 5 p.m. on February 27th when she filed a missing persons report. "Warren, I'll see you tomorrow," she had told him, and he said, "All right." However, he failed to appear the following day. And he didn't show up that day. His wallet was discovered on February 28th near the Blue Heron boat ramp, and the owner was notified. Individuals prepared to inform him about the wallet. Then someone called Monique and asked, "Hey, do you know where Warren is? He is not present at work today." At the boat ramp, his wallet was discovered by someone. And Monique was worried right away because in the 4 years that she had known Warren, he had never missed or arrived late for work. And because he didn't have a car, he had never, as far as she knew, visited the part of town where the boat ramp is located in all that time. It was also an hour and a half on foot from her bridal boutique to the boat ramp, so he definitely would have required a car to get there. In addition, he had no need to visit the boat ramp. It was so unlike him that there was no way to explain it. She became worried right away. That's the reason she reported him missing to the police straight away. She was quite concerned since she had a gut sense that something horrible had happened to him. She gave the cops a picture of Warren from a few years prior. She also informed them that Brian Sr., the guy in charge of the Save a Life Jacket Foundation, was the one who had discovered his wallet. It turned out that after they had rescued it from the Colorado River, Brian Sr. had discovered it in his son Brian Jr.'s automobile as he was cleaning it out. and he inquired about it with Brian Jr. "Why is this wall in your car?" he asked. Brian responded, "Oh, that's right, I was planning to return it after finding it at the boat ramp, but I simply forgot about it." Brian Sr. was a little dubious of all of last night's chaos because he was thinking, how do you just forget about something like that if you intend to return it? The biggest suspicion was, I believe, why would you even take it in the first place? Like, why did you just get into your car with this guy's wallet? Particularly after getting to know Brian, you should know that, to put it mildly, he was an odd steward who enjoyed a variety of odd hobbies. Thus, it was only dubious, and when Brian went out that day to visit a friend, they thought it strange, so Terry, his mother, decided to go peek inside his room. She also discovered Deemer's startling revelation while having dinner. A dismembered human head was discovered in her son's closet. She felt embarrassed. Can you ever picture opening your son's closet and discovering a real human head? How in the world does your brain handle something like that? That was accurate after all. The closet is plastic bags. The human head was in one, and something was in the other. She was aware that her son had slain this individual, even though she had no idea what was in it. She proceeded to the kitchen sink and placed these two plastic bags inside. Then she called Brian Sr., Brian's father, and he came over right away to help her deal with what she had just found. After Brian Sr. arrived home, he used a towel to hide the plastic bags in the sink. They then called their son Brian Jr. and informed him that they had to use the car. They were merely attempting to maintain their composure, or at least give the impression that they were, so that Brian would not be aware of the discovery. He would return home as usual, simply believing that it was just another ordinary day. Brian received that call then. When he returned home to give them the car, Terry and Brian Sr. decided not to contact the police right away, so they waited until Brian pulled into the driveway. The police are already at the house when Brian returns. He thinks, "Oh shit, they found the human head in my closet." As soon as he spots the police cruisers, then he simply keeps driving or doing whatever. In order for the police to come and take him into custody, they wanted to be sure he was at home. You know, the police come up to the house quite casually, no sirens, nothing, just moments after Brian arrives at Terry's, his mom's house. They arrive by car. The officers simply approach Brian, who is still in Terry's driveway, and ask, "What's going on, man? Something your parents discovered in your room appears to be causing them some worry." And he responds, "Yeah, I think so, and what would that be?" the police ask. Brian simply informs them that it is a human head and hands. Then, referring to the missing local man by the incorrect name, he confesses to killing him. He calls in Warren Brown, but he merely confirmed what his parents already knew and didn't even hesitate to accept his guilt. They discovered a head in his closet, you know? I just find it really difficult to understand that. Vision. Imagine discovering it in your child's wardrobe. It's simply crazy. Well, you know, they knew. However, this actually did confirm it. Their boy is just standing there acting like he just killed someone. He was really helpful, and the officers even walked him over to the patrol car and placed him in the back. He doesn't even need to be handcuffed or anything like that. He simply enters voluntarily. I'm really at ease with everything. Brian Sr. is attempting to console Terry as she is sobbing, but they are both still trying to process the news that their son is a murderer and that there are human remains in the house. They brought Brian to the cops. Handcuffs, nothing like that. I know I've previously said this when they really bring him into the interrogation room. This is true even if it's only recently come to light that he killed someone. He kills people. However, his attitude seems so composed about it. They don't fear that he will attack them violently, flee, or do anything else. It simply turned it off. However, they also transport Terry and Brian Sr. to the police station, in isolation. After conducting separate interviews with them, they leave Brian Jr. waiting while they speak with his parents, essentially providing the police with a summary of all that has occurred between the previous 24 and 48 hours. Terry informed them that after having the vehicle pulled from the boat ramp back to the residence, they weren't even positive if the vehicle could be salvaged there. It was essentially tires. Yes, everything was soaked and the batteries had been sold. They assumed it would most likely be a rot-off. However, Brian Sr. only gave the automobile a quick tidy-up. He discovered the wallet and the information that they had located the smaller while he was doing this. And there was the entire issue of the blood. The police believed they had observed blood on the car's boot. Their concerns about their son being involved in something negative were greatly heightened by the combination of those two factors. They discussed it with Brian as well. It goes without saying that they questioned him about the water. He mentioned that. However, they questioned him further in depth at home regarding the blood that was discovered on the automobile. "Oh, you're probably from that special effects class I took," he said. Terry entered the room naturally since his parents didn't initially think the bust was real and the blood bag was most likely a fake. Of course, his parents knew that he was fascinated by all things macabre, including serial killers and other gloomy subjects. However, they never would have imagined that their son would be able to commit murder. Law enforcement. Upon questioning Brian Sr., he disclosed to them another discovery he had made in the glove compartment of his son's vehicle. He had discovered an enormous knife. Naturally, after discovering the wallet, he attempted to contact Warren's employer, who was prepared to return the item, and discovered that he had not arrived at work. And that's when he suddenly understood. This guy hadn't shown up for work, you know. His son's automobile contained his wallet. The automobile has a big knife in it. That appeared to be the source of the blood on the car's boot. It was all adding up to the worst conceivable combination. Listening to the conversation with Brian Sr. is really painful, as it is evident that he is completely distraught by his son's actions. Even while he knew his son was capable of it, he was still unable to understand it. And like Terry, he wanted to believe in his son for as long as possible. Their desire was to accept their son. They refused to accept the possibility that he was a crazy murderer. By then, there was no question about it. Subsequently, Brian was extremely cooperative during his questioning. In an effort to calm him down and gauge his mental condition, the police began by asking him open-ended questions about himself and his life. And he doesn't seem nervous at all, which makes his manner really odd. When a detective asked him, "Why are we here?" he didn't seem the least bit troubled by the circumstances. "I'm married to someone," he replies with a deadpan. Even though he's just getting started, he seems to be gloating about it. He describes the crime in great detail, including how he killed Warren. Now that Murray is likely going to spend 13 years in prison, I'll play a tiny clip of it so you can kind of see what it was like in his interrogation room and how he was acting. Considering that we are just getting started, I have no idea. "We entered my office just now. I'm probably going to spend 20 years in prison, but the parking lot is there, and this is the location of the former bridge." Alright, so on this bridge over on Greg, Brian admitted to police that he was driving around on February 27th in what he described as a depressed mood. And when he was driving beneath a bridge close to the sheriff's office at around 11 p.m., he noticed a man who was wrapped in a canvas and dozing off beneath the bridge. Thus he stopped. He put on 3 layers of gloves, took out his knife, and then approached the man wearing a Michael Myers mask. After removing the canvas, he began repeatedly stabbing the man in the head and neck. Naturally, this man was Warren, and Warren began to ask, "What are you doing? How are you spending your time? Why are you acting in this way?" Furthermore, Brian simply keeps stabbing him while he is saying these things to him, and he performed this play-by-play for the police in the questioning room, demonstrating to them exactly how he killed Warren. It's deranged. They continued to be barbarians. This has happened to me, and I was just fortunate to do it in Australia. This was how I was stuck on top of him, alright? Neither could he retaliate. He further admitted to investigators that he stabbed Warren between 30 and 40 times. "I am aware that you do this for him. I told myself that I didn't want to continue doing this for a long time." Additionally, he claimed that when Warren gave one last gasp and gave up trying to fight back, he knew he was dead. He added that it was surprisingly simple to explain to detectives. "I was barely perspiring," which is kind of like, like you kind of sneaked up on this homeless guy and started stabbing him without warning. This helpless man even goes into further detail, telling them that he was snarling and making animal noises while he killed Warren, and he was yelling to Warren, "Nasty, dirty, stinky, stinky," over and over again. It was surprisingly simple, in fact. I was becoming perspiring. I tell him, "Oh, this guy is going to be hard," however, it was surprisingly simple material, and when I killed him, I couldn't stop giving sticky, filthy, stinky speeches. His voice and his reenactment of the entire incident also demonstrated how regretful he was for the whole thing. During this moment, I was also growling immediately. In fact, he felt pleased of his accomplishments. Having made his first kill and gained entry into the Little Dick Club, he felt happy of himself. This list of serial killers and psychopaths, And as he describes how he killed this man, he is grinning. It's also rather freaky. He even kind of stops in the middle of recounting the incident and apologizes for being so morbid at one point. He claimed, chuckling, that the entire killing and event took between 1 and 2 minutes, and that by the time he was finished, Warren's head had virtually come off of his body. Furthermore, the admission that he had put on 3 layers of gloves indicates that he had these gloves, that is, 3 separate pairs of gloves in his car, ready for this very occasion. It had been a long time coming for him to do this, and then, only this evening, he had summoned the bravery to kill someone. He claimed that he cut open Warren's stomach to view his insides after killing him. Warren was then stripped and beheaded by him. He then severed his hands before grinning at him with a Glasgow grin, which is essentially a jest. You cannot even begin to imagine the extent of Warren's mutilation. Even Brian struggled to remember all the ways he'd disfigured Warren. I stepped on it for another day because I was so happy. But the thing is that, once he was finished, he snapped pictures of Warren and the surroundings. However, these images were removed from his firing. However, they were able to retrieve these pictures with the assistance of the U.S. Secret Service. During the interview, Brian continues by saying that he repeatedly stabbed Warren in the eyes and covered both of his hands with Ziploc bags. He managed to chop off half of his left arm, but only managed to chop off 2 pieces of his right arm. Warren's body was left behind, but his head was placed into an old pizza box. After that, he drove home and placed the hands and the head in the boot of his car before putting them in his room. After that, he wiped the knife. He disposed of all more evidence from that evening as well. In addition to explaining everything in as much detail as possible, he then cleaned the clothes he had worn during the murder. He wants to include everything. He wants every single detail, every single loss to be known to them. He's acting everything out. He even goes so far as to sketch up a bird's eye view so they can pinpoint the precise location and method of the incident. He seems to be reliving the excitement of his kill. His parents found the head, so it's clear he never had a chance to dispose of it. However, he discloses to the police his plan for getting rid of them. He intended to dispose of the hands separately at a different location and putting the head in a paint can before throwing it in a ditch. He also explained to them how he got to the boat ramp. Thus, following all of that, he had to wash his clothes, get rid of the evidence, clean the knife, and so forth. He was too worried to sleep, believing that because one of his 3 pairs of gloves had a hole in it, he had left a partial print at the site of the crime. In the end, he returned to the scene of the murder, picked up Warren's body, loaded it into his car, and drove to the boat ramp. He watched as Warren's body floated away after being thrown into the river. After that, he attempted to leave by getting into his car. However, the part of his tale about trying to drive away, as I already indicated, was correct. The boat ramp's gradient prevented him from doing so, and his automobile simply slid back into the river while he was inside. After that, he left. As we all know, blood was discovered on the car in the remainder of that tale. Brian also says that although the police showed interest in the blood, they weren't particularly eager to solve the case. Subsequent examination revealed that, in fact, there was additional blood found on Warren's vehicle, which added to the already overwhelming amount of evidence against him which, at this point, is hardly unnecessary. They already have the hands and the head, so they don't need the additional blood. The most unsettling thing is that they have access to his entire interrogation. It seems as though he is incredibly eager to share with them every detail of his murder. He's grinning, laughing, telling these dark jokes. He truly made a point of being an offensive, edgelord type who was preoccupied with macabre themes throughout his entire persona. To be honest, he sounds like a huge freak, so it seems like there were signs that he would do this. Although there were indications to the contrary, his parents simply assumed that their son was a morbidly fascinated person and never considered that he would be capable of anything like this. They simply reasoned that his neurodiversity may have contributed to his obsession with these sinister objects. Terry, his mother, stated as much during her interview. She acknowledged his dark sense of humor and his fascination with murder and serial killers, but added that she had actually given him a book on crime scene investigations in an attempt to channel his energies constructively and perhaps even lead him toward taking an investigative and perhaps even a morbid view of the situation. Additionally, police proceeded to speak with Killeen, Brian's friend. On the day that his parents found the human remains in his closet, Brian was hanging out with her. Additionally, since the 9th grade, Killeen and Brian have been buddies. Furthermore, she added that Brian had always been provocative and gave this description of him. I would characterize him as being pretty edgy when I first met him. He enjoyed making statements that caused others to pause and consider themselves. He desired to deviate from the norm. His jokes were consistently darkly humorous. He almost never spoke jokes that didn't involve death, violence, devastation, breaking the law, or some other form of generally deemed dark comedy. When detectives spoke with Killen's mother, she revealed that she had suffered injury on the day that Killen and Brian had been hanging out, the day the remains were found, and that he had left Suba so quickly after receiving the call from his parents requesting to borrow the car, so much so that he had left tire marks behind when he drove off. She also informed detectives that Killen had told her that Brian had threatened to kill a homeless person so he could get away with it, saying no one would notice them. Just as Killen disputes that Brian ever said anything to her, she also disputes that she ever said this to her mother. However, she did mention that Brian had a history of talking about killing people, and she stated that she expected a more significant murder if he ever stopped. She remarked, quote, "I was surprised that he had killed someone, but I was also surprised that he had only killed one person, which is so insane to me." In other words, you wouldn't want your friend to kill multiple people, even if it were a large-scale mass murder, just because you think they are capable of doing so. You choose to overlook it. Act as though that is the case. Do you really believe he is incapable of accomplishing that? I don't understand. I just don't understand why nobody reported or said anything about these things, not to put him in jail per se, but to get him the assistance he so obviously needed to stop this from happening. In that friend group, Patrick, another friend of his, also mentioned Brian in this way. Our whole friend group was like really weird, he added. Like all of those, we were merely individuals in a group, didn't really belong anywhere else, and they eventually crossed paths with one another throughout their time in school. Together, we were all just a little odd. I simply kind of tried to accept Brian for who he was and accepted the off-color remarks and anything else that appeared strange. Furthermore, he stated, quote, "Our friend group would joke about how he would be the one to kill us that was intended to be a jest, and nothing more. None of us really believed it would or could occur, in my opinion." Interviews were conducted with a few of Brian's teachers, and 2 of them mentioned that he was obsessed with the Columbine massacres. One of them went so far as to say that he was obsessed with school shootings in an unhealthy way. The teachers all asserted that Brian's parents showed little concern for the troubling nature of the events taking place. As far as Brian was concerned, his parents were certainly aware of the numerous incidents he was involved in at school, but they didn't seem to be worried that things would get worse. Additionally, they believed that her son was being singled out by the school due to his uniqueness. One of Brian's teachers mentioned a meeting in which all of the teachers at his school discussed Brian's behavior and how the staff truly believed he posed a serious safety risk. And they all decided to watch him very carefully. It seems so crazy to me that a teacher would even allegedly tell someone, quote, "If anyone is going to shoot up for it, it's going to be this kid. These are mature, professional instructors, and yet they were so worried about this child." However, were there any reports indicating that someone took action? Did anyone attempt to enlist this child's assistance to stop what was evidently going to happen, or what they thought would happen? As you guys recall, I also indicated that he had a book with all of these statistics about serial killers in it, along with what appeared to be a fairly straightforward murder scheme. However, it stated that 1 broke in to kill adults, 3 killed kids, 4 took possessions, and 5 fled. Then it had hunting knives, a .45 caliber pistol, and a large amount of booze, within the same volume. Additionally, there were remarks regarding Brian's natural evil beliefs. One such quote goes, "A natural evil villain does whatever she can get away with, she just has her own interests in mind. Whether it's for convenience or profit, she doesn't feel sorry for the people she kills." I mean, I really think that no one who knew him thought he was capable of killing people. Or at least that's what I want to think. Because if not that is, if there were murderous schemes in his school books, then I don't understand why nothing was done. Preventative measures were like non-existent. Everyone looked to be thinking, oh, that's just Brian at that point. Brian is like a little bit nuts. There's something slightly reminiscent of a school shooter about him. We love Brian, even though he might kill someone. That's just Brian. We don't want to delve too far into it for Brian. It is difficult to place oneself in the situation and feel what it was like at the time. I want to be generous and give everyone the benefit of the doubt, but this seems kind of crazy, especially the way the teachers are handling it. They are observing the staff, discovering things in his books, and hearing him talk about it. They are telling him that they wanted to keep an eye on him and that if anyone was going to shoot up a school, it would be this child. And yet, they are doing nothing to help him. I'm just not sure. I find that really puzzling. Following the murder, police also spoke with the two men who had stopped to allow Brian to use the phone. They belonged to a father and son. They went by the names Kellen and Dawood. They also said that Brian would constantly say, I'm effed while they were warming him up in the car while he waited for his parents. And the son was attempting to soothe him. And while he did find it a little odd, he didn't give it much thought, which makes sense considering that this child just recently damaged his automobile by allowing it to roll into the Colorado River. Thus, you wouldn't be thinking, oh, this guy's just mad at somebody if you were to say, I'm after like in my opinion. It would be obvious for you to think, oh, this guy is so afraid of all the trouble he's going to get into right now after conducting all of the interviews and gathering all of this data. Officers visit the location where Brian claimed to have committed the crimes. And they do discover Warren's arm when they get there. And to be honest, I think this is sort of screwed up. However, it's captured on camera. It's audible to you. It is visible to you. When they find the arm, the female police officer present bursts into laughter because there is an armed person there. Oh my God. Hey, I just wanted to bring that up in this way because I thought it was incredibly inappropriate, and I'm not sure if that was because she was still processing the revelation shock or something else entirely. Furthermore, I found it hard to believe that a police officer was joking about discovering a deceased person's arm, but I'm getting off topic. In any case, they were able to locate bits of his arm from Brian's chamber, where they had his head in his hands, but they were unable to locate his body. Naturally, the search for the body went on, and it was crucial to find it for a number of reasons, including the desire for closure. However, as far as the inquiry was concerned, at this point they had plenty of evidence, so they really didn't need it to find Brian guilty. In fact, Brian admitted to the detectives that he had originally intended to just leave Warren's body where the crime had occurred, but he changed his mind after learning about forensics. Additionally, he informed detectives that his forensics research made him think that police had fewer detectives and didn't care as much about high-risk individuals. They also didn't think that detectives would spend as much time investigating high-risk individuals' murders, deaths, or missing persons, such as homeless or prostitutes. He even acknowledged that, although he had been thinking about murder and someone for at least a year, he had only been planning this better for about 6 months. His search history on the internet was likewise highly discouraging. Every day he had been searching Google for ways to deal with thoughts of murder, thoughts of suicide, and thoughts of suicide. He looked about as well. What is the typical response to a house invasion? When someone is kept at knife point, how do they respond? In the months before the murder, how lethal is another stab wound? In addition, he was searching for articles about Houseman in Baton Rouge. Additionally, he looked up avoidant personality disorder, schizoid and paranoid personality disorder, and acute paranoia. He also looked up how to remove data from an Android phone on February 28th, the day following the murder. Is evidence washed away by a river? The following day, he looked up how to get rid of organic waste on Google. In addition, Brian asserts that he suffers from high-functioning Asperger's syndrome, major depressive disorder, ADHD, and schizo-something. Thus, this could be schizoid disorder, schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, or schizotype disorder. He says he was experiencing delusions and that he was never formally diagnosed with anything related to schizophrenia. It seemed as though all eyes were on him. He developed an obsession with others ogling him. He thought that birds and everyone else were observing him. As a result of all of this, when questioning him, investigators were extremely cautious about the questions they asked, making sure to be very detailed, in order to gain a sense of his mental state at the time of the incident and to prevent him from claiming insanity. As far as crimes go, this one is pretty nearly as planned as they get. As they're attempting to accomplish this and asking him all these questions, they really just want to prevent him from being able to get out of it in any way. In fact, Brian says something crazy. "Give me a call," he says. However, I believe that everyone has considered carrying out a school shooting. I have to disagree. I think I just don't really like people. Not everyone has considered shooting up that school, in my opinion. though I don't really call myself strange, and believe it or not, things really get worse. He just continues going. He doesn't thwart an order. He simply never stops. Additionally, he informs the authorities of an event that occurred on Halloween 2018, in which he murdered a stray cat. I won't get into specifics, but if you want to move right on and hear nothing at all about this cat, that's fine. Just 1 minute. It's crazy and the whole thing is really disturbing, so I don't want to talk about it too much. In essence, though, there was a black stray cat that frequented his father's house. He put it in a sleeping bag and executed it in the most horrifying manner. He then killed it and, like he did with Warren, severed the head of the cat. Subsequently, he placed the cat's head in a wine cork box and its body in the shoebox. He then placed them in the trash as soon as they began to smell. Furthermore, there were never really any consequences for it. There were rumors throughout Grand Junction, as if individuals were aware of this, but they were all mistaken for mere hearsay. He continued by admitting that he had skinned a dead hedgehog he had discovered on the side of the road. Furthermore, he informed the police that at one point the man just really jumped as if he needed to stop talking. However, he simply adored a yarn. Additionally, he told the cops about an incident from last year in which his parents discovered a ticket in his room and a kit that I had been constructing. It had tools like shovels, duct tape, zip ties, and knives. Received a song that was written specifically for her. Additionally, his parents somewhat intervened on his behalf. They said something like, "You should throw them out of the kit." It resembled an ultimatum. Someone said something like, "Throw them out of the kit or we're calling the cops." Which is absurd because, at some point, his parents were clearly thinking of calling the police in reference to a murder kit they had discovered in his room. They were clearly perplexed by that, but they weren't persuaded that he was capable of killing. I just don't understand why this guy didn't get any help. He seemed to be in serious need of assistance. If it could have been avoided, I'm not sure. Even with assistance. It doesn't concern me. I have no idea how he was. It's obvious that I wasn't present when it happened, but hearing this at all is absurd. When detectives questioned him about his original plan about the market, he replied that it involved finding a sex worker to hold the victims captive while he tormented them. They were genuinely attempting to ascertain his motivation as well. They inquired as to whether he experienced any sexual fulfillment. "No," he replied. They told him, "Ted Bundy tried and accomplished it for these reasons. Tell me, what was your motivation?" And he declared, "I wasn't motivated by anyone, but I can do it too, if these others can." And honestly, it is his motivation. As if all he wanted to do was emulate these guys. All he wanted was to be a nun. One more of these infamous murderers was inspired to carry out a similar act after reading about Ted Bundy and the Zodiac killers. He said that he had always wondered what it was like to commit murder. Bryant had a Reddit account where he would post comments on his dubious beliefs and viewpoints, which was also discovered during the inquiry against him. At the end of his interrogation, it seemed as though he had come to the realization that perhaps he had yaped a little too much and that perhaps things hadn't gone exactly as he had imagined them to go in his head. They weren't particularly incriminating, but they were just kind of creepy and revealed a lot about the inner workings of his mind. He remarked, quote, "I probably wouldn't have done it if I could go back to that night. I wouldn't have done it, knowing how it felt and how this would end up," which makes it sound to me like he felt that things didn't go precisely as he had planned. He doesn't regret what he did. He's more sorry that he was discovered, and it's possible that he anticipated 3 distinct outcomes: more time to get away with it, or greater renown. He was hoping for more satisfaction. I'm not sure. I thought it would be the best feeling in the world, he added. He also commented to the investigator, "I feel like Hannibal Lecter after the questioning as they were being led to the jail's booking room." This again demonstrates how much he admired murderers, even imaginary ones. Thus, in January 2022, Brian Hare ultimately entered a not guilty plea due to insanity, requiring a clinical evaluation. He responded, quote, "Yeah, it's just kind of a thing that happened when the physicians questioned him about his feelings on the subject. I hate to say it, but it did." When asked what exactly sucked about it, he responded. He refrained from expressing guilt. He did not express sadness. He informed him that it was awful as he was confined, unable to see his buddies, and missed the internet and video games. That's why it's not a bad thing that a guy died. He is unable to play video games, which is awful. In his more than 37 years in the criminal court system, case judge Richard Galley described it as one of the most horrifying cases he had ever seen. In February 2023, a jury finally dismissed his claim of insanity and convicted him guilty of 2 charges of tampering with a deceased human body, 1 crime of first-degree murder, and 1 count of tampering with evidence. He received a sentence of 13 years in addition to life in jail without the possibility of parole. Furthermore, he is presently a prisoner at Colorado Springs Buena Vista Correctional Complex. If there's one thing that Armani's Bridal Boutique in Grand Junction has done to honor Warren's life, it's the construction of a memorial. If anything, I hope that you will remember how much Warren was loved. He was well known to all the residents of Grand Junction, and it was not unusual to see him reading or feeding the birds. And he truly made a huge emotional impact on a lot of people. And the fact that he was taken away for such petty motives hurts my heart. Nothing is selfish, really, but this is so absurd, and it broke the hearts of a lot of people in Grand Junction who knew and loved Warren.